Hey, how's it going? So you're up, you're dressed, you're ready to go. Remember, get into your routine, okay? It'll make life easier. This is school time. The hours might be a smidge different, but just try to go ahead and get in that school mode. This is the way it's going to be for a little bit, okay? Very strange, I know. Never in my life as a teacher or as a student have I ever had anything like this happen before. Just a little bit crazy. All right, when we left last chapter, remember when Dixie was terrorized by the thunderstorm? He had a pathological fear of thunderstorms, has a pathological fear of thunderstorms, and it made him just go crazy in that trailer running through it. And then he woke the preacher up, knocked the preacher over, but in the end, the preacher told Opal, well, we'll just have to take special care of Winn Dixie when there's a thunderstorm. Just telling her, gosh, that he loved Winn Dixie so much. So that was really special to Opal. That made her feel really good. I don't have any special vocab words for chapter 12. I don't think. If there's anything as we're reading, I'll explain it. But there wasn't anything that stood out to me as being a vocabulary word that we would need to read. So, all right, we ready for chapter 12? Don't you love the book? Oh my gosh, such a good book. Chapter 12, page 79. Me and Winn Dixie got to Gertrude's Pets so early my first day of work that the close sign was still in the window. But when I pushed the door, it swung open. And so we went on inside. I was about to call out to Otis that we were there, but then I heard music. It was the prettiest music I have ever heard in my life. I looked around to see where it was coming from, and that's when I noticed that all the animals were out of their cages. There were rabbits and hamsters and gerbils and mice and birds and lizards and snakes, and they were all just sitting there on the floor like they had turned to stone. And Otis was standing in the middle of them. He was playing a guitar, and he had on skinny, pointy-toed cowboy boots, and he was tapping them while he was playing the music. His eyes were closed, and he was smiling. So when somebody is playing the music and they're smiling and they have their eyes closed, they're enjoying themselves. When Dixie got a dreamy kind of a look on his face, he smiled really hard at Otis, and then he sneezed, and then his whiskers went all fuzzy, and then he sighed and kind of dropped to the floor with all the other animals. Just then Gertrude, you remember who Gertrude is? The parrot? Just then Gertrude caught sight of Winn Dixie. "No!" she croaked, and flew over and landed on his head. Otis looked up at me. He stopped playing his guitar, and the spell was broken. Now, a spell meaning kind of like all the animals are just kind of in a trance, just like listening to the music. They're under a spell. They're in a trance. But when Otis opened his eyes and saw that Opal was there, he stopped playing. The rabbits started hopping, so he stopped playing his music. Remember, the animals had been in a trance and a spell, and now he stopped playing the music, and here's what happens. The rabbits started hopping, and the birds started flying, and the lizards started leaping, and the snakes started slithering, and Winn Dixie started barking and chasing everything that was moving, and Otis shouted, "Help me!" For what seemed like a long time, me and Otis ran around trying to catch mice and gerbils and hamsters and snakes and lizards. We kept on bumping into each other and tripping over the animals, and Gertrude kept screaming, "Go! Go!" Every time I caught something, I put it back in the first cage I saw. I didn't care if it was the right cage or not. I just put it in and slammed the door. And the whole time I was chasing things, I was thinking that Otis must be some kind of a snake charmer, the way he could play his guitar and make all the animals turn to stone. And then I thought, well, this is silly. I shouted over Winn Dixie barking and Gertrude yelling. I said, "Play some more music, Otis." He looked at me for a minute, then he started playing his guitar. In just a few seconds, everything was quiet. Winn Dixie was lying on the floor, blinking his eyes and smiling to himself and sneezing every now and then. and the mice and the gerbils and the rabbits and the lizards and the snakes that we hadn't caught yet got quiet and sat still, and I picked them up one by one and put them back in their cages. When I was all done, Otis stopped playing. He looked down at his boots. "I was just playing them some music. It makes them happy." "Yes, sir," I said. "Did they escape from their cages?" "No," Otis said. "I take them out. I feel sorry for them being locked up all the time. I know what it's like being locked up." "You do?" I said. "I've been in jail," Otis said. He looked up at me real quick and then looked back down at his boots. "You have?" I said. "Never mind," said Otis. "Aren't you here to sweep the floor?" Okay, now, Otis has told Opal something pretty significant. He said he feels sorry for the animals being locked up in the cages because he knows how that feels because he's been in jail. Yikes! And he says, Opal's a little bit surprised. She didn't know that. She's like, "Oh, you have?" And then he kind of told her quickly, and then it's like he was kind of sorry he had even mentioned anything and went back to business. And he's like, "Aren't you here to sweep the floor?" "Yes, sir," I told him. He walked over to the counter and started digging through a pile of things, and finally he came up with a broom. "Here," he said, "you should start sweeping." "Here," he said, "you should start sweeping." Only he must have gotten confused. He was holding out his guitar to me instead of the broom. "With your guitar?" I asked. He blushed and handed me the broom, and I started to work. I am a good sweeper. I swept the whole store and then dusted some of the shelves. The whole time I worked, Winn Dixie followed me and Gertrude followed him, flying behind him and sitting on his head and his back and croaking real quiet to herself, "Dog, dog." When I was done, Otis thanked me. I left Gertrude's pets thinking about how the preacher probably wouldn't like it very much that I was working for a criminal. A criminal is somebody that's been in trouble with the law. And clearly, if Otis had been in jail, he was probably in trouble with the law. Sweetie Pie Thomas, remember Sweetie Pie that we mentioned back several chapters ago? Sweetie Pie Thomas was waiting for me right out front. "I seen that," she said. She stood there and sucked on her knuckle and stared at me. "Seen what?" I said. "I seen all them animals out of their cages and keep them real still. Is that my magic?" she asked. "Well, kind of," I told her. She hugged Winn Dixie around the neck. "Just like this grocery store dog, right?" "Right," I said. I started walking, and Sweetie Pie took her knuckle out of her mouth and put her hand in mine. "Are you coming to my birthday party?" she asked. "Well, I surely am," I told her. "The theme is pink," she said. "I know it," I told her. "I gotta go," she said all of a sudden. "I gotta go home and tell my mom about what I seen. I live right down there in that yellow house. That's my mama on the porch. You see her? She's waving at you." I waved at the woman on the porch, and she waved back, and I watched Sweetie Pie run off to tell her mama about Otis being a magic man. It made me think about my mama and how I wanted to tell her the story about Otis charming all the animals. I was collecting stories for her. I would also tell her about Miss Franny and the bear and about meeting Gloria Dump and believing for just a minute that she was a witch. I had a feeling that these were the kind of stories my mama would like, the kind that would make her laugh out loud the way the preacher said she liked to laugh. So now let's think about, she would have, if Opal were able to tell her mama the stories that she's collected so far, she would have quite a few stories to tell, wouldn't she? So let's see, the whole story about finding Winn Dixie at the grocery store, that's a story. The story about brushing Winn Dixie with her hairbrush and brushing Winn Dixie's teeth with her toothbrush. The story about meeting Gloria Dump. The story about meeting Miss Franny Block at the library. The story about Otis playing the music for the animals. The story about Winn Dixie during the thunderstorm. Oh my goodness, the story about Winn Dixie catching the mouse at church. And there's probably some I'm forgetting. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. But she would have, for her mama who loved stories, she would have a lot of stories to tell her mama. And she feels kind of sad that she's not able to do that. But it's fun to think about. She's had a lot that she could tell in the short time that she's been in Florida, doesn't she? Okay, so that's the end of chapter 12. When we come back, we'll be reading chapters 13 and 14. But just kind of ponder, kind of think about the stories that she would have. If you could choose one of those stories, all those stories that we just mentioned, and you could only tell about one of those stories, which one would you want to tell about? Like, which one would you want to share with somebody else? I bet I know what a lot of you would choose, but they're all pretty good. Okay? All right, so till we meet again, you're going to do your chapter summary for chapter 12. Remember, a couple good sentences at the bottom that summarize the chapter, what happened, and then a lovely picture at the top to go along with it. Okay, you do well, do your best. Act like I'm standing over your shoulder getting on your case, okay? All right, y'all be super good, and when we meet again, we'll be reading chapters 13 and 14, okay? So it'll be 2 chapters next time. If you want to read ahead, that's fine, just as long as you follow with me when it's time, okay? All right, I'll see ya.